site. Axia, your local IT business solutions.
Al-Kawthar is a humanitarian project for hundreds of widows and orphan children in Iraq. For just £30 per month, an orphan will be provided with a monthly allowance of food, clothing, education, as well as other basic necessities. Donate now. Together we can make them smile again.
Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. I begin in the name of Allah, the Merciful, the Compassionate. All praises to Allah, the Creator of the universe and its Sustainer, the Provider of believers and non-believers. And may His choicest blessings be on the seal of His prophets, the last of His messengers and His holy progeny. And in particular, during these nights of lamentation and grief, may His incessant blessings ever continue on that illustrious grandson of the Holy Prophet, on Abu Abdullah al-Hussein, salawatullahi alayhi. Allahumma salli ala Muhammad wa ala Muhammad wa ajil farajahum. We begin, as always, by offering our collective condolences to that grief-stricken, heartbroken mother, to Bibi Fatima Zahra salamun alayha, and of course to the chief of all the mourners, to the Imam of our time, may Allah hasten his reappearance, to, of course, Imam Mahdi Ajjallahu Faraja salawatullahi alayhi. And one of the ways in which the Imam alayhi salam becomes manifest, when we say Ajjallahu Faraja, it's a question of connecting with the history of his beloved grandfather Hussein alayhi salam. For he has said, it has been narrated that the 12th Imam alayhi salam has said, that whoever remembers my grandfather Hussein alayhi salam and prays for my faraj, for my relief from the difficulty of ghaiba, and therefore his reappearance, then the Imam, the 12th Imam himself will pray for that individual. So what we are doing in these gatherings is actually very important. Reflecting upon how the history of Karbala applies to our lives today, and how we may be able to implement the teachings of the history of Karbala, of the teachings of Imam Hussein alayhi salam and his eminent companions. The specific lens through which we are looking for these discussions is for lessons about mental health. And we have set out 10 different dimensions of mental health teachings that we see manifest in the history of Karbala. We began by looking at goal setting, and then we moved on to resilience, and then thirdly, mindfulness practice. And each of these 10 are from scientifically supported psychotherapeutic interventions that are offered on the UK NHS as advocated by the NICE guidelines, the National Institute for Clinical Care and Excellence. So what we find is that there is a lot of connection. There are many bridges between what the science of psychology is telling us and neuroscience, and on the other hand, what the history of Karbala teaches us. And this is why it's so important that we keep revisiting the history of Karbala every year, because we learn new lessons. Not because the history changes, of course not. What changes is our understanding of that history. What changes is our ability to view it, because we are a year older. We have a year of extra life experience. Indeed, we may have had particular difficulties during the last year that makes us A, more in need of those lessons, but B, perhaps also more receptive to them. There may have been certain obstacles in our mindset, perhaps in our ego, that blocked us from understanding certain aspects of those teachings. And then suddenly we think, oh wow, that's like a whole new dimension of Karbala that was always there, but yet I didn't see it. And that happens to me all the time. And I think this is one of the reasons why our ancient teachers and scholars told us that when we look at the history of Karbala each year, we should do so with a freshness, remembering that Imam Hussein alayhi salam said his mission was, as we remember every night, Islah fi ummati jaddi, the transformation, the reform of the community of his grandfather. And so it raises questions about the kind of reform we will inshallah implement in our lives today. And in this new Islamic year, what can we do to strengthen our connection with these teachings? So, having established the platform of the importance of goal setting and bringing with you the resources that will be needed for whatever mission inspires us, just as Imam Hussein alayhi salam left Medina with his companions, but mainly family, including women and children, and he made clear that the women and children were going to be a key part of his mission. They were key resources for him. He was planning ahead, and he was planning for success. Often when we start a project, we've got voices of doubt in our ears, and we listen to those doubts, and it makes us feel defeated before we've even started. The Imam alayhi salam was planning for success, and this is why he took his ladies with him, because he knew that the mission of sacrifice required ambassadors, required those who would communicate that lesson all the way around the world and throughout the ages to come. And so we receive these teachings in the 21st century as a tribute to the ambassadorial work of the ladies of Karbala, particularly Bibi Zainab alayhi salam. And then we built on that foundation by looking at resilience and how Karbala is full of examples of resilience, that when our mission towards that objective doesn't go to plan, and there will be obstacles, and we will stumble and fall, how do we get back up again? And we saw many examples, particularly from the history of Hazrat Muslim bin Aqil alayhi salam in his journey to Kufa as the ambassador of Imam Hussein alayhi salam. We saw from his example how the Imam alayhi salam guided him that when difficulty comes, firstly, we accept the reality as it is, and then secondly, we move forward with confidence that's rooted in tawakkul, in trust in Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And when we combine these two, then we become ready for the spiritual dimensions of the psychology of Karbala, particularly with regard to mindfulness practice. We saw how the Imam alayhi salam was clear in demonstrating both the focused attention kind of mindfulness through his dhikr practices, particularly on the night before Ashura, as well as the open attention side of mindfulness, which is about presence in the moment. And we saw many examples of this, particularly in the way in which he reacted with a dhikr and a dua when the army of Umar ibn Sa'd began marching towards him on the morning of Ashura. Today we move on to the fourth step in our journey, inshallah, which is gratitude practice, shukr. We see, of course, in Islam that shukr has a very important place. It is not by coincidence, of course, that at the end of our salah, the daily obligatory prayers, 5 times a day, we go into prostration, into sajda, after completion of each prayer, and we say shukran lillah, or we say thank you to Allah. And we are taught that we should do it 10 times. But it raises the question, how do we do it? Because it's in the how of it that we meet ourselves. And in the present moment, we discover whether the how of it is just tick box, ritual. We're just doing it because it's something we do and we just say it 10 times. Or whether we're actually present and we are thinking about specific gifts from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala for which we are grateful. And it can be anything from the ability to pray, not just knowing how to pray, but physically being able to pray, having the health to do so, having the tawfiq to do so, having the awareness and the dedication to do so. It could be thankfulness for our material gifts, for our social gifts, for the people in our lives, for our work, for the opportunity to work, for the opportunity just to say thank you. Because we learn from the teachings of Imam Jafar Sadiq alayhi salam, salawatullahi alayhi, that even when we just give thanks to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala for being alive, for each breath, for having given us a breath, we give thanks for that breath that we were able to inhale and exhale. He was saying that each breath necessitates a thanks or 1,000 thanks. In some versions, 100 thanks or 10 thanks. But the point is, with each breath, there is a multitude of thanks that we need to give. And effectively, what this is trying to teach us is that we can connect our discussions on mindfulness yesterday with gratitude today. They work together. They work in lockstep, because one of the marks of a believer is that such a person is not just in a perpetual state of connection with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, but is also in a perpetual state of gratitude, such that they develop an attitude of gratitude. And they have cultivated this special state, this level whereby they have mastered the mindfulness of thankfulness. And this gives us a glimpse of what we may be able to do. But let us pause for a moment and look at what the scientific data shows us. For there is so much material, particularly in the field of positive psychology, that has shone a very powerful torch on the different dimensions of the psychology of gratitude. It is not by any means one-dimensional. There are different aspects that impact upon various different dimensions of our mind, of our thinking, of our feeling, and indeed of our actions as well. So if we look at something like cognitive behavior therapy, it affects our cognitive processes, it affects our behaviors, it affects our affect, our emotions, and it affects our sense of self. It connects deeply with our values. It allows us to manifest our values. And this is just what we see from the spiritual teachings. When we look at the empirical data, the scientific evidence, in these studies, they draw a distinction between two different kinds of gratitude: state gratitude and trait gratitude. So state is something temporary that, sometimes we have it, sometimes we don't. So we might occasionally be overwhelmed with a sense of gratitude, but usually we're not in that place. Trait gratitude is something different. It's much deeper. It's about a character trait within us that is ongoing, so that it's a part of who we are, so that this person is a thankful person as who they are. Not just when things are going really well, but even when things are not going well. They're able to identify something or more than one thing about which they can be grateful. Now, when we look at the data, it's quite striking that it's those individuals who have high scores of trait gratitude who have the best mental health. And not just in one aspect of mental health, in several different aspects of mental health. Let me cite you just a couple of different studies. In 2012, there was a study that found that those people who scored highly on trait gratitude also had far lower experiences of depression. And that's quite a powerful finding. And we will maybe think about why that might be. Because one of the things that can help us with gratitude practice is reframing. When we look at psychotherapy for depression, one of the tools that is offered is cognitive behavior therapy. There are other forms of cognitive therapy, and indeed there are other forms of psychotherapy altogether, like behavioral activation, regardless of which one goes for. And I would strongly recommend that if we or anyone we know has depression, that we should seek out psychotherapy, or indeed even medication if we have severe depression, we need it. The point is, though, one of the key techniques across different forms of psychotherapy is reframing. And reframing is really about changing the perspective that we have of the particular problem that is causing us this mental distress. It's not about pretending that the problem doesn't exist. No, far from it. In fact, quite the opposite. It's about deeply accepting and acknowledging the reality of this problem and the effects of it. But reframing is about doing something a little bit more as well. And that extra step changes everything. It's about going into a zoomed out state, looking much more broadly and identifying not just the negative aspects of what's going on, but indeed some positive aspects as well that might be happening. There might be a silver lining to this cloud. There might be opportunities that have arisen as a result of this adversity, even if the opportunity is simply for us to become stronger in dealing with it. We may have met interesting people. We may have learned more about ourselves. Whatever it might be, reframing allows us to identify the positive. Now, those people who score highly on trait gratitude almost do this automatically, like a reflex. And that helps them cope with the adversities of life, with the difficulties that are a feature of human existence. And they're able to do this reframing almost instinctively, and thereby mitigate the effect of those depressive thoughts, to reduce the impact, the burden of those depressive episodes. So that might be one of the reasons why we're seeing this data. The second aspect of the studies is that with regard to people who, again, score highly on trait gratitude, they tend to accumulate less stress and, again, have lower rates of depression, even during times of life transition. Now, one of the most difficult aspects of maintaining good mental health is during times of life transition. And there are many. Simple ones would include moving house. More difficult ones may include divorce. Different points in the transition of our lives. Going away to university, that's a big thing. Many young people struggle. Getting married, I've spoken to so many young couples who went into their marriage with great expectations, and then suddenly the reality was different to what they had expected. And that dissonance, the kind of mismatch that exists between their expectations and reality can sometimes bring on depression. And the other spouse then doesn't know how to cope with the person who is experiencing depression. And so gratitude actually helps us in these important junctures in our life, these moments of transition. When we think about something simple like moving home, there are always things that go wrong. There are always snags and glitches, things that are not quite right about the new place, things that may have been broken during the move. And the data shows that moving home is actually one of the most stressful things one can do. It's on a par for some people to divorce. That's how important these things are. So when we think about the hijrah of Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam, we see just how difficult it must have been for him and his companions to make that spiritual journey in order for the preservation of Islam and for the Muslim community. The third aspect is with regard to overall well-being. Perhaps one might even think of it as flourishing. And the data suggests that those people who have a higher level of trait, gratitude, have better overall well-being. They tend to be able to be happier and cope with a range of difficulties that life may throw. And it makes us wonder about the ancients who gave us the wisdom teachings about the shukr that we're supposed to do 10 times after each salah. Because if we did that mindfully each day, we would have given thanks no less than 50 times. 10 times after each wajib salah. And identifying 50 things for which we're grateful, even if we end up repeating some things. Imagine the cumulative impact upon our subconscious, the constant messaging throughout the day that there are good things going on in my life. It's not all doom and gloom. It's not all negative. I'm not a complete failure with only terrible things happening in my life. There are good things. Now, it might take us some time to identify them. Of course, one of the features of depression is that it becomes more difficult to identify positive things that may be going on in our lives. And that's important to note. So if we're unable to find 10, let us at least find one. And even if that one is to have remembered to give thanks, to have the breath with which to give thanks, to still be alive to give thanks. It could be as fundamental and essential as that. The key is that we should really believe it. It should be sincere, so that we're in the present moment recognizing this bounty of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Now, when we sit and look at the scientific analysis of why do we see all these benefits from gratitude practice, from shukr? How does it work? Why does it have such an impact on our mental health? What's going on in terms of the mechanisms, the cognitive mechanisms in our thinking processes? And the literature has identified a few key aspects. The first is that gratitude practice, it might sound obvious, but it's important, is associated with positive thinking. And we see great examples, at least 3 examples of that in the history of Karbala that we will turn to in a moment, from social to personal to spiritual. These positive thoughts are like little candles in the darkness of the adversity we may be in. Secondly, gratitude generates positive feelings. Now, yesterday and the day before, we were talking about the importance of separating the difficult, negative events of our lives from our experience of them. And one of the things that regular gratitude practice can do is strengthen the muscle that allows us to do that. So that even when something bad might be happening, we don't necessarily have to feel terrible about it. We may be able to take it in our stride, be resilient. And one of the ways we can do that is to constantly find positive things, because it makes us feel better. So not only do we think about positive thoughts and have positive thinking patterns, but we also have positive emotional patterns as well. So it affects both the thinking and the feeling side. And the third aspect, because it works at least 3-dimensionally, is behaviors. When people have a regular attitude of gratitude, what we find is that their behaviors, what they do in their lives, their actions, are also more positive and reinforcing of happy thoughts, of positive feelings, so that we are then able to cope and be active. Because when we look at one of the psychotherapeutic interventions offered for depression, called behavioral activation, one of the key aspects there is to become active, to do something, to maybe go out and meet a friend, or if you can't go out, at least pick up the phone and speak to somebody. But doing things can help us feel better, doing positive things. If we can, to go for a walk, to do something physical, to help. We will inshallah look at service as a dimension of mental health later in our discussions, inshallah. But activating ourselves is very important. So behaviors matter. What we do impacts what we think and how we feel. And we see that those people who have higher levels of trait, gratitude, tend to have more positive behaviors as well. Now, one of the other aspects is about relationships. They also tend to have better relationships, and we know from the data that those people who have stronger relationships have better mental health. They have, more support structures around them to cope with adversity, with difficulties. And it's not surprising. Those people who are thankful are also likely to be thankful to other people, and that's likely to support good relationships. So we see this multidimensional correlation between gratitude and mental health. And when we look at the history of Karbala, we see many examples of this, including 3 specifically that span the social dimension of gratitude, the personal, spiritual side, and of course, the relationship with Allah dimension. So firstly, from a social point of view, we were just talking about the importance of being thankful for the people around us, particularly when we consider that from the point of view of leadership, when leaders give thanks to the people around them, particularly those who are their subordinates. It makes such a big difference to the morale of those individuals and the team as a whole. And we see that on the night of Ashura, Imam Hussein alayhi salam, it is narrated, switched off, blew out the candles and said to his companions, use the darkness of the night as a camel to carry you to safety. For tomorrow is a day for martyrdom, and you have already given so much. You do not need to sacrifice your lives. Such was the compassion of the Imam alayhi salam. And when the candles were reignited, and he looked around him, and he saw all these beaming faces of sincere companions, he gives thanks to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And he says, nobody, neither my father or my grandfather, has had companions more sincere, more faithful as I have had. And he gives thanks to Allah firstly for these people, and he gives thanks to them. He acknowledges them. He acknowledges what they have done. Now, it's important to pause here and just think about a particular relationship right now in our lives that we want to improve. And the question I want to ask is this: how might gratitude help that relationship? Consider that question for a moment, please. This particular relationship that matters to you, what gratitude could help? It could be gratitude in the form of words, to acknowledge and thank them for something they've done. Even if it is a small thing like a cup of tea, acknowledging them actually can go a long way. And a cup of tea can be a big thing. When somebody is upset with you and they still do something good for you, like make you a cup of tea, that can go a long way. And the thawab associated with that silatul rahim, the reward associated with that goodwill to kinship, is extremely high and very powerful. So with this particular relationship, is there anything I can do to acknowledge this person, whether it's a parent, a child, a sibling, a spouse, a friend, or a work colleague, to say a little thanks, to recognize what that person does that benefits me, even if they do it to benefit themselves. So even if what they're doing is in their own best interest, and that's why they're doing it, and even if they're driven purely by self-interest, if we are beneficiaries of that, we can still say thank you. Often we feel, oh, I don't need to thank that person for doing that because he was only doing it for himself. He was only doing it to make his life easier. I don't need to say thank you for that. Yeah, but did you benefit? Yeah. If the neighbor removes the stone from the road, It was to help him not puncture the tires of his car. But did it help your car? Yes. Maybe it's something we can give thanks for. It doesn't need to be something big. If there are big things, then we should be sure to give thanks for them. For nothing can corrode a relationship like somebody doing big things for another and not getting gratitude for that. We have seen that time and time again. So let us acknowledge this powerful teaching of Imam Hussein alayhi salam. He could have taken the view that, oh, these people are all going to go to heaven. They will have their thirst quenched by my grandfather from the pool of Kawthar, and so I don't need to thank them. Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam will thank them. No, astaghfirullah. That's not the akhlaq of the Imam alayhi salam. He was the embodiment of the akhlaq of Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam, and therefore he also enacted the akhlaq of shukr, the practice of gratitude, to acknowledge the companions around him. And psychologically, it makes a big difference to a group of people when they're acknowledged collectively, together. It reinforces morale. And of course, when we look at the history of Karbala, the morale of the companions on the night of Ashura was remarkable. In fact, the person who we will remember tonight, Habib ibn Madahir, was instrumental in galvanizing the companions on that night and reiterating to Bibi Zainab alayhi salam that they are steadfast in the support of Imam Hussein alayhi salam. The second dimension of gratitude that I'd like to touch upon from Karbala is a very personal one, an individual one. For history narrates, and I'm looking at some of the oldest sources. If the Maqtal of Abu Mikhnaf is regarded as perhaps the oldest source we have. He was a broad contemporary of that period. And what we see is that in Karbala, in the army of Yazid, there were two brothers, Amr bin Qaraza and Ali bin Qaraza. And on the morning of Ashura, they were on the side of the army of Umar ibn Sa'd, and they were listening to the speeches of Imam Hussein alayhi salam. And he was speaking eloquently about Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, about truth, about falsehood, about justice, about tyranny. And the heart of Amr bin Qaraza was so purified that it resonated with the teachings of Imam Hussein alayhi salam. And he switched sides. And he moved to the side of, he crossed the battlefield. And he joined Imam Hussein alayhi salam. And he took permission to go and fight. And when he was given permission and he went out, he was reciting Raja's a poem in which he was saying that the battalion of helpers of the Imam alayhi salam should know that I will guard the honor of the Imam alayhi salam. Even though this person was quite young, he was saying to the enemies that they should not mistake his youthfulness for any deficiency in his courage, in his willingness to fight for what is right. Now, he was besieged by the enemy and they martyred him. At which point, Amr's brother Ali became incensed and he started abusing Imam Hussein alayhi salam and Imam Ali alayhi salam, and accused Imam Hussein alayhi salam of astaghfirullah, misleading his brother. And the Imam alayhi salam said to him, no, he was not misled. He was led to the right path by Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. But this man, Ali, even though he had such a lofty name, was debased in his soul. And he drew his sword to attack Imam Hussein alayhi salam, at which point Nafi bin Hilal steps forward and strikes him with a blow at which he falls. And Ali bin Qaraza is struck dead. His companions come to rescue him and take his body away. It reminds us how nobody came forward to collect the body of the grandson of the Holy Prophet, peace be upon him, after he was martyred. Nobody thought to say, I have kinship because this is the grandson of my Prophet. The companions and the friends of Ali bin Qaraza came forward to take his body respectfully. Nobody Nobody from that army stepped forward to take the body of the daughter of Fatima alayha salam. So we see from this example of how this young man, Amr bin Karaza, gave thanks to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala for the tawfiq that he had received, even at that last moment, to switch sides and do the right thing. And this is a really personal form of gratitude that is important when we need to acknowledge the good that we do. Not in the sense of pride, no. Not in the sense of ujb that Imam Sajjad alayhi salam warns about in Documentaries Akhlaq, no. But acknowledge our good actions as a form of hamd, as a force of giving thanks to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, recognizing that all praise is to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. This is why Alhamdulillah is in the definite, there's a definite article. It's not hamdun, it's alhamd. The definite article makes it very clear that all praise, indeed the very notion of praise itself, can only belong to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And that's quite powerful when we recognize the good that we have done. For it encourages us to do more, but inoculates our hearts with the vaccine of humility rather than allowing us to become infected with the disease of arrogance. And the third dimension of gratitude from the history of Karbala is perhaps one of the greatest examples of gratitude we have ever witnessed in humanity. For it is narrated that when Imam Hussein alayhi salam and Hazrat Abbas alayhi salam brought the broken, martyred bodies of Own and Muhammad, the sons of Bibi Zainab alayhi salam, and laid them in front of her tent, they found her in sajda of shukr, giving thanks to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala for having given her the opportunity to sacrifice her sons, and giving thanks that they were able to go forward and serve Islam in the way that it needed to be served on that day, so that it may be saved for the generations to come. That sajda of shukr was perhaps the greatest, most difficult form of gratitude practice that we have seen. And yet, we ask ourselves, when we encounter difficulties, do we have that strength of spirit to go down into sajda and to say, thank you for what has happened in my life? It is not what I wanted. It is not what I hoped for. But thank you for whatever comes to my life. And thank you for the opportunity to remember you through it. Thank you for the opportunity to turn to you to ask for your help to get through this difficulty. Thank you for carrying me through it, even if it means our demise. If the diagnosis from the doctor comes back as terminal, and we know that this disease will kill us, we can still give thanks for the opportunity to seek Allah's help, for the opportunity to seek His forgiveness before we go. At least we've had the warning that we're going to go. We have the opportunity to apologize, to seek that transformation of istighfar, that forgiveness can offer to us. There are always things to be grateful for. The question is whether we will have that spiritual strength as taught by Bibi Zainab alayhi salam. For if we do, we can see that it can enable us and indeed empower us to cope with even the most heartbreaking of events, such as the martyrdom of 2 young sons. This is an important lesson in gratitude practice from the history of Karbala. We turn our attention to the broader teachings of the Ahlulbayt alayhim salam before we conclude. Imam Ali alayhi salam has taught in his famous dua taught to Kumail. He says in many different ways about gratitude, but in just one short phrase, he says, وَأَن تُوزِيَنِي شُكْرَكَ, and provide for me with gratitude. This idea of وَأَن تُوزِعَنِي is not just give me gratitude, make me thankful. No, it's about bestowing the faculty of gratitude upon us. It's this special kind of gift, and we know it's special because of what came before it. The foundation that the Imam alayhi salam laid for this is the phrase, the dua, وَأَسْأَلُكَ بِجُودِكَ أَن تُدْنِيَنِي مِنْ قُرْبِكَ, that I ask you by your infinite generosity, the kind of generosity for which there can never be any reciprocity, to draw me closer to you. Having set that foundation, he then asks for this kind of gratitude. Such is the importance of it. And to end on a scientific note, one of the studies that were carried out at the University of California in Riverside was a comparison of regular gratitude practice, independent of religion. And they found that the group of students who at the end of each week noted 5 things about which they wanted to be grateful versus 5 other things in a different group. The group that was doing the gratitude practice had meaningfully higher levels of mental health and happiness after just a few weeks of doing this practice. Such is the importance of gratitude practice. But the final example of gratitude that we turn to is the example of gratitude from the great companion of Imam Hussain alayhi salam, Habib ibn Madahir. For it is narrated that when Imam Hussain alayhi salam had reached Karbala, of course, there were people who had come with him, and there were people he had asked to leave. But there was only one person who he had specially called to him. He wrote a letter to Kufa, to Habib ibn Madahir, that began, Ya Habibi Habib, O my beloved Habib, I am in Karbala surrounded by enemies, please come to me. Habib ibn Madahir wept when he saw the handwriting. He was so grateful that the Imam alayhi salam had remembered him and sought his help. He was able to make his way out of Kufa even though the gates had been shut. He was able to, through his wit, was able to go past the guards, and he reached Karbala, and he found that the Imam alayhi salam had set aside one of the weapons that he had kept for his companions, because Habib was not able to leave Kufa with any form of self-defense. And Habib embraces Imam Hussain alayhi salam. But when Bibi Zainab alayhi salam hears that Habib is in Karbala, she sends Fidda to send her salutations to Habib. Habib weeps, what a day has come that the granddaughter of Rasulullah, the daughter of Fatima, sends salams upon a wretch like me. It is narrated that Habib fought valiantly on that day as a commander in the army of Imam Hussain alayhi salam. As he falls, he bids his final salams to Imam Hussain alayhi salam. Imam Hussain arrives to him, and he laments that he cannot even quench his thirst as he is passing away. But he says, do not worry, my grandfather is ready with a cup from the pool of Kawthar to quench your thirst. Habib says, I am not concerned about my thirst. I'm worried only about what will happen to you after I go. The Imam says, do not worry, Habib, for I will shortly follow. Allah la'natullahi ala al-zalimin. وَسَيَعْلَمُ الَّذِينَ ظَلَمُوا أَيَّ مُنْقَلَبٍ يَنْقَلِبُونَ إِنَّا لِلَّهِ وَإِنَّا إِلَيْهِ رَاجِعُونَ. Let us pray to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala that He forgives us our sins and the sins of all our parents and teachers and ancestors. May He elevate them. May He imbibe in our hearts the trait of gratitude and be true as Adaras of Imam Hussain alayhi salam as we give thanks to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. May He keep us and the generations to come faithful to the Imam of our time. Sultan Mubarakatul Fatiha.